Last time we returned to where we were in the book and did a paragraph where Gung-thang Kön-chog-tanpay-drön-me berates, puts down the opinion of a Tibetan Lama whom he respects greatly, but not about this opinion. And this is an example of the freewheeling. Well, what does freewheeling mean? But anyway, the freedom to pick and choose among the greatly, and this is the greatly respected, the greatly respected lamas and the greatly respected opinions of a particular lama who took the I'm seeking not just to read the line, but the adorning of illusions in subsequent attainment outside of meditative equipoise as the meaning of emptiness, realization of emptiness dawning as dependent arising, and the realization of dependent arising dawning as emptiness, of this dawning of illusions outside of meditative equipoise. Gung-thang says, this don't contain a way of simultaneously avoiding the two extremes. And even autonomous, even though, and he's not talking about the failure of the autonomous to get the subtle object of negation that the consequentialists get. He's not talking about that. He's saying that they practice this mode of dawning as like illusions outside of meditative equipoise. Meditative equipoise meaning, the dawning as like illusions, this practice. They have this. So that can't be what, at this point, we're talking about. There's something else. As great as that is. And he could even add, as great as the autonomous view of emptiness is. There's something deeper than their view of emptiness. And as great as this practice of the dawning of the illusion-like appearance would be, even if you took the consequentialist view of emptiness. That would be really terrific. But here, Tsongkhapa is talking about something deeper, or all of these scholars are talking about something further. So we got that straight last time. And he wants to give us an example to make it easier for us to understand. In Tibet and in many places where there are servants, or if we go into a store where there are different levels of knowledge or different levels of authority. And the authority speaks to I'm trying to think of, you see, I'm thinking of counterexamples already. Often in a store, the clerk, the people who put the stuff on the shelves, for instance in a supermarket, will know more than the manager. If you want to know where something is, even if you ask the manager will say, speak to the clerk. I worked in a lumber yard. I don't know how many summers it was. The one summer I did work makes me remember it as at least 2 summers, if not more than more than 2 summers. But the guys in the yard would often know more than the manager, who in fact was my father, would know more than my father, although my father had more power. When it came to power, my father had had the power. But in fact, he was a guy who knew how to use his power. So he didn't swagger. But when you want to get something done on the telephone, and you're calling up an airline, in some of those circumstances, you say, let me speak to your boss. Let me speak to your, what's the word?
Manager.
Supervisor. And if the clerk, what's the person called instead of clerk? Clerk's
service.
The what?
Customer service representative.
Oh, customer service representative, right. The customer service representative will not, usually won't offer you to speak to the boss. That's not a possibility. They don't offer those possibilities. You'll have to say it, maybe not even just once, but say it a couple times. Okay, but you don't want to get into these too many complexities as these. You got to flow with the example. All right. So the servant here, and so we've got to adapt this to one of these situations. And you say, you go into the park. Well, the park, I can't imagine being able to get a hold of the boss. It's hard to come up with a good example here. Is this something I can do? Can I? Well, in credit card thing, when you want to, you can usually take care of it right with that person. But you have to ask the specific question. They won't offer it to you. But usually that person on the line would you please not deduct this extra credit, this charge? You have to say it. They can offer it right away, but you have to ask for it. And if you ask for it and they don't give it to you, then you have to ask the boss. All right? Things like that. And we get, it's good to think around a little bit like this. All right. So, is such an activity, is this something that should be done? Is it okay if I go into that room and the helper, if somebody comes to the monastery, is it okay if I go over into that place and one of the new workers at Travesty says, I don't know. And leaves it at that. And so the person's left with, I don't know. So that's, I don't know. That's how it's left. So this leaves it at that. And then you ask somebody else, and the person says, I don't know, but gives a two-part answer. I don't know. You've got to ask that person over there. There's a two-part answer. So there's a two-part. There's a two-parter. And through asking the other person, I'm done. I just made a three-part out of it, but there's a two-parter. But what's to be understood here is there's a two-parter. So, if in answer to the above, the servant explains, the master knows that. I don't know. The master knows that. Two parts. Or just answers. What are the two parts? I'm trying to figure out what are the two parts. I don't know. The master knows. Or are the two parts, the master knows. The person over there knows. I guess it is that one. The person over there knows is one part. And by import, we don't want to say implication here. The word implication is forbidden. By import, I understand that she doesn't have the authority, the power over this. Right? Oh, okay. I started down the wrong track there. The first, if it was just, I don't know, it would be left at that. I don't know. And you wouldn't get anywhere. But if the servant said, the master knows, then by import, you know that the servant, there's some import. So there's two things going on. One's directly said, the master knows, and then the servant doesn't have authority on this. So I'm okay, and it just ended there. Two things going on. The servant doesn't have authority. Now, but I want to stick with the word power, not authority. Why? Because in what is exemplified, the word power plays a big part, not the word authority. But I wanted to insert in here the word authority because that's the more common word, but doesn't have power over this. But power is perfectly fine. So I inserted authority, but I'm going to erase authority. Okay? I just wanted to bring it up in this oral discussion. Who's got the authority? Now let's say you wanted to go into a room you got to ask the boss. And I could have said, I suppose, but I always wanted to hide if somebody, everybody who worked in the yard, it was called, everybody knew that my father was the boss. So of course I wasn't hiding that. But if somebody came into the yard, I didn't say, well, you should ask my father, he's the boss. I never showed that off. And on the very first day, when I went out on a delivery, and the guy riding the truck stopped at a bar, we jumped out, and I showed I was one of the guys by immediately having a drink. I forget Frankie's last name, it'll come to me. And that was reported back. So I became one of the boys. And I think one of the other drivers took me to his house and delivered a couple of boards, big boards, to his place. And of course I never told anybody. I figured, oh, he's dropping off a couple of boards at his place. Of course I never told anybody that he was dropping boards off at his place. They knew they could trust me, which they could. Okay, anyway. You gotta ask the boss. Which means the person asking it has got two things going on. One's on the surface and the other's known by import. Similarly, when not inherently existent is set forth, its meaning, not being understood as utter non-existent. Now, of course, it said not inherently existent. This is totally obvious from the words that this is, it doesn't say in words, not it doesn't say utter non-existent, right? It doesn't say that. It says not inherently existent, right? Is understood. That's understood as meaning, so it's understood as meaning, okay, but that's as meaning reliance on a collection of dependent arisings of causes and conditions. I mean, in a way, it's not only not inherently existent, not only is understood as utter non-existence, not only is not understood as utter non-existent, but is also understood as meaning reliance on a collection of dependent arisings. Okay? And when dependent arising is set forth, its meaning not only is not understood as mere arising, is understood as the absence of own power. You see, that's why power has to be used. That is non-reliance on any other. Absence of own power. What does absence of own power mean? It means non-reliance on any other. So it's understood as non-reliance on any other. Absence of non-reliance, absence of own power means, so it's hard to get the absence. So what? Own power. Own power would be own power, non-reliance on any other is own power. Absence of non-reliance on any other, right? Did I get it right?
So, out of confusion, asking this question, absence of non-reliance, isn't that a double negative that then means reliance?
Yes.
The absence of non-reliance equals reliance, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, I just had to get that clear, okay.
Yes. And thank you. Because it's just, and it also means the absence of inherent existence. Yes, absolutely. And that's just the kind of thing we need to clear up. That is to say, absence of non-reliance, absence of own power, that is to say, absence of non-reliance on any other. You know, I'm under my own power. I don't rely on anybody else or any other, or, right? Things are under their own power. That's kind of how they look, even if we don't put those words on them. And if you ask yourself, you know, did this tomato exist in and of itself without depending on soil and blah, blah, blah? You say, of course, it depended on soil and so forth. But when you look into how it appears, I chose something that's very fragile. I've got a tomato sitting on the counter that will eventually get a little sun because I want it to ripen a little more. But even it seems to exist from its own side.
Can I ask something?
Please.
In the first example, you said we have two things. Boss knows and the clerk doesn't know. So we have two things. So in parallel with this example, here there are so many things. Here is dependent arising, then mere arising, then absence of own power, and non-reliance on any other. So how do you group these four into two?
Now, I think, I learned a lot this morning about what's going on here, and I was still learning as I was speaking. And as Geshe Saba said, I understood a whole lot when I began teaching others. And I was still learning as I began teaching. And I thought this morning, I'm finally understanding this crazy paragraph, which I never understood before, which was always a problem. So I was, I started out with the wrong two. And so the only two which is the two that's being talked about here are the two that we ended up with. In other words, I was correcting myself as I was talking. So the two are what the person who asked the question hears. The person hears, the master indeed knows that. And what the person knows by import, that the clerk does not have power over this topic. That the master knows it and the clerk doesn't have power over this topic. Those are the two. The clerk, the servant. So it's what's going on in the mind of the person asking the question to the servant. And so similarly, knowing emptiness as absence of inherent existence and what is it? Knowing that as meaning reliance on a collection of dependent arisings of causes and conditions, those two. That double set. And then in reference to dependent arisings, a whole other set, knowing dependent arising as the absence of own power, and knowing that as meaning the absence of inherent existence is the other double set, the other two set. Thank you for asking the question. So it means when you take dependent arising to mind, it stimulates realization of emptiness in and of itself. When you take emptiness to mind, it stimulates realization of dependent arising. When you, as has been said, when you come out of meditative equipoise and dependent arisings appear to your mind, when things other than emptiness appear to your mind, the full meaning of dependent arising appears to your mind. Arya Davis. Now notice the sequence of what was said just before in the similarly follows the sequence of those which have a dependent arising are not under their own power. I wondered about the sequence. Excuse me. Notice in the last part of it, and it also means the absence of inherent existence. The last line, the fourth line is, therefore they do not have self, are not under their own power. All these are not under their own power. Therefore, they do not have self. Self means establishment by way of their own nature. Then the qualm, that in one way finishes it. But the qualm is why somebody wouldn't be open to this, to there being a two-part, that there's something left. The person is, there's something left. And I've gotten rid of the word nominalities. And I'm trying to put in mere names. Because I mean, why use a fancy word? A fancy word is like the words in law and in medicine, where you can't think about it. It's turning it into a fancy word. So, it's the same word. And at some point, as this goes down to the end of the chapter, there's a equal sign where I stop the editing, and it goes back into nominalities, and it just nominalities is, just switch those back to names, and it becomes, you get the other side. If it's mere names, mere names, you're just saying the names isn't going to produce the object. And so you get the other side. And all right, that be it. And I'll see you next week.